All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Please take your seats. We'd love to get started. This was a wonderful networking opportunity first thing in the morning. I've never seen such energized group of people so early, but wonderful. Thank you. I'm Armida Riojas. I'm with the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, San Antonio branch office. I have responsibilities for our San Antonio branch office operations, which primarily includes our banking supervision, which are those examiners that are in the banks within Central and South Texas, as well as our outreach operations. And what we focus on primarily is to make sure that we're engaged in the communities within Central and South Texas. So it's likely that when you walked into this office, you realized, one, it probably looks very different than many other offices in the Federal Reserve System. So by a show of hands, how many of you have been at a Federal Reserve Bank office before? Okay, and so you probably noticed, very different, no law enforcement at the front door. Also, you didn't have to take off your belts and shoes and all that good stuff like you would at the airport, but also very hopefully you found it very inviting. We have windows, it's open to the public, and that was the intent with this office. We moved in this office in 2014, and the goal was to make sure that we had an inviting space where we can have programs like this one and make sure we had an opportunity not only to share what we feel is what we see in the economy and important for us to share with the public, but that we're also connected to you and understand what you're seeing in the economy, what you're seeing in your geographies, what you're seeing in your industry, as well as in your businesses. That's critical because often we say that data is backwards looking and we're very data dependent, as you probably hear a lot from our Chair Powell, as well as other governors and presidents. And we are, but we also need to complement that with real-time understanding of what's happening in the economy currently, but also what you see coming in the future. That's critical for us to be able to be effective in monetary policy. So having said all that, you probably also noticed when you walked in a wall of board of directors, and we are dependent on those board of directors. They represent business leaders within Central and South Texas, and I'm going to just give a nod here to the gentleman in front of me, Rad Weaver, who's a former chair of our San Antonio branch board. And it was critical for Rad to sit on our board. He gave us great intel about what's happening within the San Antonio branch community, but also within the industries that he represents. So his perspective was critical, again, to monetary policy. And so this partnership for us is critical to what we do. Our partnership with UT spans in many, many years, I think since I started here at the Fed 17 years ago. And in fact, it's so critical that it was the location at the UT Macomb School where our new president and CEO, Lori Logan, first gave her speech last year. So very critical partnership, and we look forward to continuing partnering in the future. So having said all that, welcome. Thank you, and whatever we can do to support you, please consider us as a partner in the future. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dean Mills.
Thank you so much, Armida. It's a delight to be here. My name is Lil Mills. I am Dean of the Red Macomb School of Business, and I've never had a job I was more proud to do or enjoyed more than this one. And today's panel is a highlight of my year because I get to ask questions and come away, like you, an hour from now, so much smarter. This is an annual event, and we're proud to be back in San Antonio after a little bit of an absence. Armida mentioned Rad Weaver. He's one of our regents, so we're particularly grateful to have him. And I have three very short messages about what's new at the Red Macomb School of Business. We're in the middle of planning, fundraising, and then building a new undergraduate school of business for our undergraduate students and our faculty. The architects are revealing floor plans today back at the 40 acres. I can't wait to see them. That's thing one. Thing two, I'm now on the board of the Clements Center for National Security. And one of the things the Macomb School does in partnership with them is a minor in international business and national security, which, as you will learn today, is a very important intersection for all companies doing business in the U.S. And the third thing, just in case anyone ever asks, capitalism is alive and well at UT Austin, particularly as stewarded by the Macomb School of Business, where we have 6,500 students working on degrees. That spans freshman to PhD, another 6,000 working on a minor in business, some of whom are in this national security minor. That's fully a quarter of UT Austin students hungry for an education in business. So get connected with us. We are open for business. I've got 3 speakers here today who can talk to us about defense and the economy. In Dallas, we were a little broader about geopolitics. Here in San Antonio, I'm digging in a little deeper into the defense industry. They're going to introduce themselves before we start the questions, but we have Luis Torres, Dennis McGowan, and Paul Edgar. And Luis, let me start with you. Audience, who you are and what you do.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And before I start, something I learned in my times in College Station. Howdy.
Howdy.
So I'm the senior business economist here at working out of the San Antonio branch. I look at the Texas economy, or world Texas economy, and I also look at the Mexican economy.
Good morning. My name is Dennis McGowan. I'm the Chief of Acquisition and Contracting at Army North. Before I say anything else, I'd like to say that normally when I speak to a group of folks about what I do, especially if it's a group of civilian folks that don't understand the military as much as some, most folks don't know, what I do, and I can say pretty much whatever I want, and no one will know if it's the truth or not. But today, my boss's boss's boss is sitting over here. And you at least know enough about the military to pick out which one he is. So, I won't give you up. So I needed to get that out of the way. So it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak and to be with you this morning.
Hi, my name is Paul Edgar. I am, for a couple more days, I am the interim executive director of the Clements Center for National Security. We have a new permanent executive director inbound. For about 5 years I've been the associate director, and just for about 6 months the interim. So just I guess maybe a little public service announcement. Our incoming executive director is retired Vice Admiral Joe McGuire, Navy SEAL, spent a lot of time with JSOC, retired about 15 years ago, and then served early in the Trump administration as the director of the National Center for Counterterrorism. But he's coming to join us for a few years, so that's only my title for a couple more days. I have about 25 years experience in the U.S. Army, and then my experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, which those of us who have been in the military recently, obviously that's a profound part of our experience. I found that for part of it, there were scholars that produced material that I found helpful to help me understand what I was doing, how we could do it better, how to think about what kind of environment we were in. And so at that time I thought, if I have a second career, maybe it'll be academia, and that's where I am now. So was fortunate to finish a PhD at UT, and then join the Clements Center. Most of my time is spent with undergraduates and master's students, although we do have a good core of PhD students that are making contributions as well.
Well, I'm sure Luis and Dennis both need to say their opinions are personal and do not represent the entire FRB or the military or Army. So they are here in their knowledgeable but personal capacity. And Luis, I'm going to start with you to set the stage about the overall economy. We always do this when we're able to partner with you. Tell us about the economy and interest rates, looking back at 23, and what you can say that you're keeping an eye on for 24.
So thank you. So I would say the U.S., Texas, San Antonio economy exceeded expectations, right? If we go back to the start of last year, some economists were actually forecasting a recession for 2023, right? You remember that. But what actually happened, was interesting was that their labor market was really resilient to the current Fed hike cycle, the cycle. So in the case of San Antonio, employment did cool down, right, to 2.6% in 2023 from 3.8 the previous year, but still above trend. The San Antonio economy historically grows on average around 2% employment growth. It records 2.0% employment growth. So that's still above that rate. It was above the U.S. Employment growth rate in 2023 was 1.7, and below the Texas employment growth rate in 2023 and 3 that was 3.1%. The unemployment rate in San Antonio ended at around 3.8. Above the U.S., 3.7, but below Texas, 4.0. Private hourly earnings, wages increased substantially. They increased in 2023 in San Antonio, 4.9%, higher than the U.S., 4.1, but lower than the Texas, 5.9%. But if you put it in perspective, that 4.9 is above 3% inflation, right? So that gives strong real wage growth in the San Antonio economy. So the outlook for 2024 is for the San Antonio economy as well as the Texas economy to coming back to long-term growth. As I mentioned earlier, that's around 2.0% employment growth for 2024. And just to add something, just to set up the discussion of the military, I tried to find numbers and data on the contribution of the joint base here in San Antonio, and the Texas Controller Office had some interesting information about that. The information, unfortunately, goes up to 2021. Based on the information from the Texas Controller Office, the contribution to the Texas economy of the joint base here in San Antonio is around $39.1 billion. And they actually employ directly around 83,000 people, and between total indirect jobs, around 121 jobs here in the San Antonio economy.
Okay. When we were doing a similar panel in Dallas, we had a member of the Clements Center, George C., comment that when we're thinking about Russia as a specific example, he thinks of it as a gas station with nuclear weapons. So it's not a major economic player other than energy, but it takes on an immense geopolitical gravitas because it's a country with a powerful military. So I want to turn back, Luis, not specific to Russia, but how big a deal is the defense industry and its surrounding issues in Fed business outlooks? Is it a small amount of the economy or is it big? And then related to that, if you're worried about wars and trouble spots, how do those affect the Fed's business outlooks?
So I think going back, taking a page from our Chairman Powell, if you saw that 60 Minutes interview, I think that was a great interview, by the way. If you have an opportunity to look at that, it answers a lot of questions regarding the economy and monetary policy that I cannot discuss. But regarding that, your question, D. Mills, I think he was asked point blank, Chairman Powell, about the wars and all these black swans that have currently happened to the world economy, right? And one thing they mentioned, of course, is that it affects decision-making, business decision-making, is the uncertainty caused by that. And I think that's a major factor when anybody's making decisions in public or private institutions, and that's the uncertainty. And that affects your ability to forecast or predict what's going to happen in the current year or going forward, right? So I think that's a major contributor, and that brings in noise, and you have to consider that when we're making policy decisions.
So by the black swans recently, things like the COVID outbreak that really created supply chain problems, the Russian invasion of Ukraine with its attendant energy volatility and agricultural volatility. To any of you, what else was on his list of black swans or in your mental list of black swans recently that have increased uncertainty?
Well, I think sort of especially when it comes to supply chains, one of the black swans that we've been thinking about. I don't know if you can call it a black swan if you've been anticipating it now for a while, but certainly with the resurgence of China, something in the South China Sea is substantial. To say it's substantial is an understatement. Some of the other problems that we've had globally, I think, are more manageable. But that's a big one.
Or the supply chain things in the last couple of months around the Suez Canal and the Red Sea and.
Well, I wouldn't. I actually wouldn't call that a
Would
black.
you call
I
that
wouldn't.
Manageable?
I would call that manageable.
Yeah.
I would.
Yeah.
And while the South China Sea in China is a different
Right.
animal altogether. Yeah.
Well, Dennis, I'm going to turn to you and talk about munitions and personnel. Your role involves acquisitions, contracts, and if you think about all the military forces combined, can you talk about how far down we've drawn supplies? If my news source is largely Wall Street Journal, et cetera, and in reading about the Ukraine war, I'm left with a sense of we have drawn down inventories quite a bit between Afghanistan and whatever support we're providing over in Europe and the Middle East. So whether it's bullets or guided missiles, like all of it.
Sure. So anything you're going to procure, you're going to use dollars to do that, obviously, right?
Right.
So first is the impacts of Ukraine are impacting our ability to spend dollars elsewhere. So we're feeling that. Now, as it pertains to your country's ability to produce 105 howitzer rounds, we're okay, right? Are we using some of the stockages that we had prior to the start of the war in Ukraine? Yes, we are, as you see in the news. But as far as the production capability is concerned, there's really no issue with America's capability to produce munitions.
And do you have a sense, whether it's naval vessels or other major assets, we have a big deferred maintenance problem? And I'll put that in context. I'm told at UT our deferred maintenance is on the order of $3 billion in aging buildings.
It's far worse.
Okay.
So when you're faced with the black swans and the unpredictability that we find ourselves in at this time, we didn't mention bringing back 78,000 Afghans out of Afghanistan. Surprise. We didn't plan on doing that in that manner. Of course, we've got what's going on in Israel and Gaza right now. But $137 billion is right now the deferred facilities maintenance issue. I'm talking about bases, $137 billion. That's where our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines live. That's where we work. And we at Army North in particular, I can speak to my experience there. We are very innovative in our methodologies at overcoming those challenges. I can say with certainty that in our neck of the woods at the end of the fiscal year, that's where our dollars go to, is to improve. But really it shouldn't be, in my opinion, especially faced with recruiting challenges, it shouldn't be the last thing that we do if we intend to attract talent. It should be amongst the top priorities of things that we do, take care of our installations, yet we're faced with this kind of massive bill.
And should a major war break out, I think I'm hearing you say, Dennis, it will be, nothing's easy, but the U.S. certainly has the capability to ramp up its production on the supplies side. Ramping up personnel is probably much harder.
could always reinstitute the draft, right?
Right.
Not even discussed, just for the record, not discussed.
And your personal opinion,
And my
not
personal-
that of.
Not my
US
personal
militaries.
opinion either.
Right.
So I'd like to discuss a specific example from the war in Iraq, and I've got to make a couple references. So in Iraq, 75% of casualties in 2007 were attributable to improvised explosive devices, which you've all heard about. So an improvised explosive device is, very simply put, a large explosive device with a electronic charge put to it that goes bang. And that's what we were facing until our adversaries introduced a new innovation called the EFP, or explosively formed projectile. This mechanism was directed energy. It was shaped in a manner in which it could cut in half a large Stryker, which is a large armored vehicle, certainly a Humvee, and it was catastrophic to those inside. So you had an enemy who was innovating on the battlefield. So how did America respond? All the might that you would hope to see as a patriot, right? First thing that the DoD did was make the production of the MRAP, the mine-resistant ambush protectant vehicle, the #1 priority for the Department of Defense, right? So when that kind of thing happens, this is going way back to my time as when I was filling out contracts myself, there's a little box that you check on the contract, and it makes it a national priority, and that priority flows down the supply chain that basically says, you're going to do this and nothing else before you do this. That happened immediately in response to this new EFP on the battlefield. And instead of going through the litany that we were discussing, Rad, the litany of regulations, the government threw the acquisition book out the window and said, we're going to award contracts to 9 contractors. Boom, they did it. We're only going to pay you to develop 4 of these MRAPs. We just want to see what you can do quickly. We're not going to do the typical acquisition approach of develop, test, evaluate, readdress what we discovered. We're going to produce them. Long story short, in a year, we produced 9,700 MRAPs and shipped them to Iraq to counter this emerging technology of our enemy. That's the type of thing America can do when we toss aside some of the rules and we make it a priority.
Right. And so in a situation where we need that kind of urgency, we're capable.
They're very capable of doing it, yeah.
I was having a conversation, I think, at this table about the big 5 contractors. Can you tell us who those are? Because I only had a few of them in my head.
Lockheed Martin, this is in the last 12 months. Lockheed Martin with $27 billion. Now, chuckle. Lockheed Martin Global with $22 billion. Lockheed Martin. And Raytheon, or it's actually RTX, which is a merger of Raytheon and United Technology at $21 billion. General Dynamics at $19 billion. At number 5 right now, guess who it is? Lockheed Martin Corporation. Different DUNS code, Dun and Bradstreet code. $18 billion. And here's everybody's favorite airplane producer, Boeing at 17, and then Northrop Grumman, Leidos, Electric Boat, Booz Allen. Booz Allen really is the one that sticks out for me because it's about people.
Right.
Consultants and expertise. And having been, not for Booz Allen, but for myself, a consultant in the past, that was kind of surprising to me.
So, Paul, I want to turn to you, and I've got a question about whether our industrial base related to the military is viewed positively or negatively, and I think Lockheed Martin's coming to UT Austin next week. The engineering said he's expecting protests. I had a slightly controversial speaker at about 3 weeks ago. We staffed up that event with a lot of police. The engineering dean was asking, what do I need to do? What advice did I have? Somewhat speaks to the idea that creating and preserving this strength. Different now, or I somewhat look at universities as well. During the Vietnam War, there were plenty of university protests. So I'm old enough to think the world's not much different, but what's your view of how the populace sees?
Populace on campus or just in general? Well, my experience, I think, is it tends to be positive. I think there was, in a sense, an overcorrection as a response to the public's negative reaction, broadly the public's negative reaction to Vietnam, and there was some sort of making up for that with our generation of with our wars and our generation of service members, and I think to a large degree that also extends to industries that serve military purposes. I think there is a general understanding, at least again in the circles at least that I'm in, that the military and industry need to work together, right? I think one of the terms that's and you may have just used it, the military-industrial complex. What is that? And usually it's used in a negative way, but it's used rhetorically as fundamentally a negative thing. But the history of that term, going back to Eisenhower's farewell speech, I think in 1961, and he used the term. And we're in, if you contextualize it, we're in the middle of, or not even in the middle, we're kind of at the front end of the Cold War. We're in an arms race. It may not have been the height of the arms race, but we were certainly in an arms race. Dennis mentioned this cycle of innovation, right? You have a threat, you innovate against it. The threat then innovates against you, right? This is a cycle, and we see this kind of cycle in lots of different places. But we were in that kind of a cycle, and Eisenhower's concern was not that the military and business would work together, but that this sort of frenetic pursuit would be owned by the military and industry, and not owned by elected leaders and the electorate, right? Okay. So, and I don't think that we're in any danger there today. I don't feel like that these are big contracts, right? A lot of these are big contracts, and the defense budget is a substantial part of our budget. But I've got no sense that the Biden administration, or that the Trump administration, or that the Obama administration, or even that the Bush 43 administration, which would probably receive the most, at least public, scorn for this, not justly, I don't think, but would have received that kind of scorn. These were not administrations that were beholden, that turned over defense to the military and industry. So I think that political health is something that we have. I think it's largely recognized, but just turning to the campus culture, we have more than 50,000 students, so you're going to have more than 50,000 views. We do have a small group at UT, in percentages, that would be against any kind of defense contractor doing anything for any amount of money, right? So, and they have the right to make their views known within UT's policies. So that'll certainly happen, but the campus as a whole, I think, is centrist in the best sense, and is thoughtful about how they understand these things.
Well, and we're partnering with ROTC. The Macomb School, is partnering with ROTC this spring on a joint leadership conference for students from across the country. So it's a comfort zone for me and my college. I want to turn to supply chains a little bit, and back to Luis. What are you seeing in the Texas economy as we, the U.S., worry a little bit about reliance on Taiwan and semiconductors and the effort to do a little more onshoring or nearshoring? And since you're following Mexico as well as Texas, you may be seeing a little more of that in Monterrey, Texas, coming close, Monterrey, Mexico, coming close to the Texas border. What can you tell us in the economic effect there?
So the nearshoring discussion actually started before the pandemic, right?
Yep.
It started because of the U.S.-China trade dispute, right? The tariffs.
Right.
So with that, and then we had the pandemic, and that even moved forward that discussion, right? So a country that would benefit or expected to benefit or benefiting, would be Mexico, right? Of that movement of operations from Asia, or specifically China, right? Given that Mexico has access, has a major trade agreement with us, with the U.S., the labor supply, all these factors, right, contribute to Mexico becoming a major player. At that moment, when the trade dispute started, we imported more goods from China than another country in the world. And now we import more goods from Mexico, right? Mexico is our number one trading partner now. Now, manufacturing, that's for total goods. But actually manufacturing, that move started from 2022. So everybody's talking about nearshoring. If you go to Mexico right now, there's a lot of discussions, panels, that talk about nearshoring, but it's interesting. There's not a lot of stories, right? About nearshoring. The Banco de Mexico, the Central Bank of Mexico, did a survey, asking private companies, have you seen an effect on nearshoring? They say yes. Citibank, Banamex did a study, looked at especially vacancies, industrial vacancies around the border cities, right, from Tijuana to Matamoros. Almost zero vacancy rate on industrial warehousing, right? But if you look at the hard macroeconomic data, especially the foreign direct investment, where you have to see those nearshoring effects, right, of that investment flow from other countries, from the U.S., from our country, Europe, Asia, Japan, into Mexico, actually, they've actually not increased. In some cases, they've gone down or even flattened. But when you look at the firm level data of exports and imports of the maquiladoras, what are maquiladoras? People don't know this, are the foreign assembly plants that are in Mexico, right? When you look at those numbers, there you find the evidence of the nearshoring. What do I mean by that? Then when the tariffs were enacted here in the U.S., there was a big spike or big increase in the exports of these maquiladoras or foreign assembly plants to the U.S. Trade between those plants, specifically those firms, increased between the U.S. and Mexico. Now, if you look further, which sectors? You would find that manufacturing, of course, but in skill-intensive sectors like chemicals, computers, aircraft, and also transportation equipment. And you're also seeing these companies, these foreign assembly plants or global value chain companies, are importing more goods from Asia now, especially China, Japan, Korea, Thailand. And what's interesting that you find that the tariffs, yes, the U.S. is less dependent on China imports. But what happened, a case of trade divergence, right? Now Mexico is more dependent on Chinese imports than before. And we've seen in Mexico producing more final goods than before. A lot of those goods, those maquiladora plants that I talked about, they do parts of that assembly, intermediate goods. But now they're doing more final goods. Now, don't forget, USMCA has rules of origin. So some people would argue, oh my God, they're going to move everything from China to the U.S. No, you still have rules of origin. Content, a certain percent of the content that's produced in Mexico has to have North America content. So it's not like it can move everything to Mexico, right, from China and then export it. So what's the impact here, right? So let's think about it. So Mexico complements our manufacturing, right? Of every dollar we import from Mexico of a manufacturing good, 40 cents are made in the U.S. So just think about that, 40 cents. If you go to the Toyota plant, perfect example, you go to the Toyota plant. I had an opportunity to visit the Toyota plant here in San Antonio, really impressive manufacturing plant, state of the art. I was asking, where does your inputs come? They were telling me, part of my imports, yes, come from Mexico, but the motors are made here in the US, in Tennessee and Alabama, to show you how everything is complemented here, right? Think about now the Tesla plant in Monterey, right? We have the Tesla plant in Austin coming up, right? But then they're gonna have a brother plant in Monterey, Nuevo Leon. So think about all these benefits, how we complement each other. Of course, trade, transportation, warehousing are gonna benefit of the increased trade, right? Of that nearshoring. But so that will be a positive here for the Texas economy and for the U.S. economy.
Thanks, Luis. Dennis, I want to pull you in when I think about the supply chain or the vertical integration in military equipment. And my only point of reference is when my husband was designing missiles at Raytheon, he said they weren't allowed to hire foreign nationals into that research group. Whereas a university can have people of all kinds of origins become students or even faculty. What, if I'm thinking, and the Wall Street Journal had an article this morning about hypersonic missiles. About what Luis was talking about, you could have multiple countries and then there's a final assembly. My guess is in the missile business, 100% of that has to be U.S. manufactured or by people that are in that trusted diplomatic friendship. Can you tell us a little bit about that supply chain?
Not see spoke about in things that we build in a general sense.
Right.
For exactly the reason that you mentioned. The majority of the elegant weapon systems, they're produced in a top secret or a secret at minimum environment. By and large, most foreign nationals would not qualify. Now there are some, of course, if there's a scientist abroad that needs to be brought into a project, I'm sure that there's a way to do that. By and large, we are much more in-house.
Right.
I'd like to speak a little bit about an elegant system, but it's not a missile.
Sure.
It's the Abrams tank, which you've all seen on TV if you see the news. Ukraine, or if you've seen, any piece of footage about an armored movement, you've seen. Can anyone guess the last time we poured an Abrams tank hull, the actual framework of the tank? I'll ask you, Paul. You'll answer me. Take a guess. 1970. A plant up in Lima.
That's in Ohio.
That Lima, Ohio, that we still maintain, and we ensure we maintain the key capabilities that are required. And I bring this up to demonstrate the detailed level of analysis that we go into as a department to ensure your safety on a daily basis. Determined that when you're building a tank, the critical skill is not the guy behind the computer. It's the guy with the welding rod and the flame in his hand. We maintain those folks at Lima with work from foreign military sales and other improvements to make sure that when we do have to fire that plant up, we can do it again. There's another interesting bit of folklore about the tank. There's some glass in it, eventually being non-specific. There's some glass in it that is produced by one company in the world. They only produce the glass for us, and they wanted to shutter. Help them to maintain their production capability and stay open. We have our eyes on the problem, and we would like to have the economic benefits, the business benefits, the cost benefits of being able to spread that supply chain out, but at times we're just unable to.
So we've had some of our focus on the very large companies, but I know we have some younger companies in the defense industry here. Talk to us a little bit, and maybe Paul, you can take this one, about the ways in which military business fosters innovation out into the economy the rest of us interact with. What are some inventions that came out in the commercial world from military necessity?
Right. Well, I think historically there's, I guess I would try to contextualize this in a couple different ways. One is I think this actually moves back and forth. Often in the military, we love to say, we gave you the internet, right? And we gave you, we gave you vaccinations of different kinds and lots of different things. We gave you, so much that we learned about trauma and head trauma and that sort of thing in the medical field over the past 25 years. So we like to say that we give you things, right? Everybody should be thankful to us, and there's some truth to that. But also, it flows both ways. Innovation in the private sector that is perfected for some other purposes than we use for military purposes when the need arises, right? When it dawns on us that this could be used in other ways as well. But going back to your question, this is what is on my mind, and I'm not an R&D person. I'm not a STEM person. That's not what I do on a daily basis. So I may not be getting the big thing, but what is on my mind is this. For probably 10 years, maybe more now, we've in kind of security studies circles. Defense pundits have talked about this a tactic that it's probably goes by a few names, but one of the names that it goes by is swarming. And the idea is that you have a number of sort of semi-autonomous munitions, not expensive, at least as far as munitions go, on the lower end, not the higher end.
Not the elegant
Not
solutions.
they're just slightly elegant,
Right.
right? But something that's easily produced in other parts of the world, and that you fire a number of these at a target, but the lethality is not necessarily in each individual one, but in the mass, right? And that your defense capacities cannot react to all of that, and those some of the munitions will get through, and your aircraft carrier, for example, will sink. And we have seen what I would consider, and I don't have all the information, but the things that I have seen publicly, we have seen sort of inklings of that in Ukraine. We've seen inklings in the Russia-Ukraine war, both on the water and on land.
Right.
We've seen that a little bit with the Houthis and our response to the
Yes.
Houthis. So we've seen this in what I would consider its nascent form, right? So the technologies to me that are interesting, that will take this to something that is really sort of honest to goodness lethal are, even though I don't like to use the term AI, but I'll use it, sort of this a capacity for AI, right? Both the hardware and the software that would produce what we would call AI today, and these munitions.
Right.
And if you can combine those together in a way that this salvo of munitions is working in concert, and again, they're not super elegant, so they're affordable. You can build more than 3 of them. That's a lethal combination. It's incredibly lethal, and and it would be a problem for us to react. So, but now let me talk about this migration of that technology. Let's take that same technology and put it here in a commercial setting.
Sure.
Now, but instead of programming it to hit something, right, you're programming it for exactly the opposite, not to hit something. And so your capacity to move things and people, that's it's unbelievable. It's nothing close to what we have now. This is not an autonomous car that's hopefully not going to run the stop sign, right? it's something of an entirely different scale in terms of transportation.
Right.
That's the sort of thing that has my attention these days. Again, this won't happen next month, but over 10 or 20 years, that's significant, both in the defense industry and commercially.
And what we see right now is just the entertainment version of that. Like at the UT Stadium, you might see a really cool multi-drone laser light show. But yeah, you can
Right, it's not
imagine
reacting
those
to
being
anything,
armed.
right? It's doing
Right.
precisely what you tell it to do.
Well, I need to open it up to audience questions in just a minute, but I want to ask for closing thoughts about what you're worried about in the world. Luis talked about uncertainty being difficult. Business leaders don't like uncertainty. There are sometimes opportunities that come from it, but it's hard to plan around an uncertain world in war threats and geopolitical threats. So final thoughts on that topic.
I'll actually try to attach my comments to your thoughts there on uncertainty, because it's somewhat related. One of the things we talked about was Eisenhower's farewell address in this military-industrial complex. But I think there's a corollary. So I'll maybe start with this. I think we can take two things away from Eisenhower's comments. That one, national security can become such a frenetic activity that it's easy to relegate it to somebody else, right? It's easy to relegate it to generals and defense contractors. But that's not representative of who we are. So let's ensure that the generals and defense contractors are following the lead of political leaders. Those are the two things I think we can take from what those comments meant. But there's a corollary, I think, to those points that was maybe not necessary to state in Eisenhower's day. And that's, let's expect our political leaders to do that part of their job, right? To not just say, we don't want another Iraq. Nobody wants another Iraq. But that's a negative vision of the United States and the world. What's the positive vision that provides some certainty for people to move forward with?
Okay, Dennis, I've got some great questions here, so keep your closing thoughts short so we can get to these.
So now you know who the talker is.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're all here because somebody, unless you're Native American, because somebody got on a boat and came here from another country, okay? So what worries me is climate change. Polar ice caps melting and shipping changing and having a new frontier in the Arctic, that's of concern for me. Now, you'll be glad to know that on a monthly basis we hold workshops, Homeland Defense workshops, where we talk about these types of things at Army North. We bring in scholars and experts from around the country and the world to have these types of discussions. 14 March, shameless plug, is the hypersonics one. But going back to climate change, what would the Native Americans done back hundreds of years ago if they knew that new shipping lanes and new access were going to change their people's lives? Nation of nations of Native Americans. They would have potentially done things differently than they did at first. They certainly wouldn't have had the first Thanksgiving up in Boston. So,
Dennis is from Boston.
Yeah.
He was there.
Have something, or shall I?
So just I think one of the major risks still is that bringing down inflation to our central bank's objective of 2%. I think it's close, but the objective hasn't been achieved yet. So I think that's worrisome if inflation actually comes back, right? And again, the recessions of risk, I think right now are low. But as I mentioned earlier, last year, as good economists as we are, we messed up the forecast, right? We were saying the economy was going to slow down further, and actually was a great year, right? Growth exceeded expectations. So what happens if this year happens this, right? We don't have a crystal ball. So again, we missed the forecast last year. Hopefully we don't miss the forecast this year.
Well, I I want to start with the energy grid. Often in Houston. And the question is, we've got hundreds of critical transformers that run our U.S. electric grid, and almost everything in that grid is manufactured in China. Should we be worried about that? And what can we do to reduce any threat that poses?
I'll give it a shot. So I did. So as a disclaimer, this is this is a domestic issue, and my expertise is supposed to be foreign affairs. So no, I do think it's. I would say two things. One, I do think it's a concern, but it's not. If it's something that we approach deliberately and maturely, and on a bipartisan basis or a nonpartisan basis, that all of these things are manageable. Maybe the black swan is all of this stuff happening at once. Taiwan, the Middle East, energy grid, cyber attack. But no, I think these are certainly manageable. But they're manageable if we're mature in our politics to go about solving them.
Okay. Yeah, pile on.
If I were to procure this microphone for the government, I have to ensure that there are no parts and pieces coming from the PRC. So that does not necessarily extend to private sector grid, but we are aware of it. The first workshop we had at Army North was about the grid.
Okay. All right. So smart people are thinking about it. That's good. Here's a broader question. Is it possible or practical for San Antonio, Austin area to leverage this strength we have in military competencies to be a bigger, our region being an even bigger player in the defense industry than it is now? And how? Yeah.
So it's, if you have that comparative advantage, I think you should take advantage of that, right? Think about Silicon Valley, Austin, microchips, Houston Energy. So if you have that ecosystem here in San Antonio, it's just a point of, governments, local and business leaders getting together and try to leverage and take advantage of that competitive advantage, right? And we've seen it around the world, right? What happens, business leaders and communities get together, you see where you have a competitive advantage, and you try to focus on that and take advantage of that, right?
San Antonio, my own observations, the medical field in San Antonio with BAMC here, there's already a linkage between the Department of Defense and the biomedical industry right here in San Antonio. If I were looking to grow, that's where I would focus, would be in that arena. Yeah.
Boy,
you're not going to drag Raytheon here or General Dynamics, right, or anything like that, because they go to where they can test missiles and those types of things.
Right.
But there is that linkage with the medicine.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks. Trends for the small businesses working in defense tech. Where should they be leaning in? Maybe medical's one, but
Cyber and counter unmanned aerial systems along the swarming line. A lot going on in cyber right now. The entire nation wants to hire cybersecurity folks. That type of work, so it's a tough field to be in right now if you're a hiring manager, if you're trying to grow. But cyber is an effort for us. The counter UAS is critical for us because it is low cost, it is inelegant, and it is easily weaponized.
And tell us that acronym, unmanned aerial what?
Systems.
Okay,
But
UAS.
The big important part is the C, the counter UAS. We've had discussions already in an unclassified environment right at the Contessa Hotel nearby here. We held a meeting there where we talked about how are we going to address AI and better incorporate it. And in particular, when we go from the decision to take down the swarm of UAS to employing artificial intelligence in the engagement of taking human life. That's an ethical dilemma that we will face in the next 10 to 15 years. We're going to have to adjudicate that, but we're thinking about it and working the problem now.
And I'll just close with a comment on one of the last questions, and then if you had more to add. There was a question about what are we doing in the San Antonio-Austin region to increase the skill of our workforce. It's admission systems. I bet everybody in this room knows somebody who applied to UT Austin and didn't get in because we are a fairly fixed size university. But we've got a very active executive education wing that has courses in cyber and AI. And we particularly love having ex-military people, either the ex-enlisted kids join our undergraduate classes, or often the ex-officers come into our MBA programs between the Macomb School and the LBJ Policy School. It's a rich environment for former military people to add a business or a policy degree and then launch back out into this industry. But I know getting just the raw workforce of really smart manufacturing capable high school graduates is an ongoing challenge. So final thoughts there, and then final short thoughts there, and then we'll close with allowing them to thank you. So.
Well, I would say that at least up in Austin, there's some, they're not very polished yet, but there's some attempts to get at this. ACC has developed a whole new directorship, nice building, all refinished, but they don't have students yet, right? So that is intended to build that level of entry, sort of entry level workforce. So I know there's opportunities there, but we're still early in seeing them, or at least seeing some of them come to fruition.
I would like to just briefly go back to the small business and spend a little bit of time there. I didn't really address that. For the tactical level detail that if you're a business owner in San Antonio and you want to know how to engage the government, learn the federal procurement system rules and regulations, embrace your small business administration representatives in this area. There's an office at UTSA that helps with small businesses. Learn how to be identified as a hub zone, where to put your business so that work comes to you. Learn how to become what's called an 8A small business, where you partner with the Small Business Administration to grow your business. They help you. And we can direct award to small businesses that are in the 8A program. So it takes those big boys out of the race and gets money to the smaller tactical level companies that we love doing business with. So.
Thanks, Dennis.
So I was really impressed when Lori did her 360 visit here in San Antonio. We had the opportunity to visit with local business leaders and local public officials, and I was really impressed with what they're trying to do to try to educate or produce more skilled workforce here in the San Antonio area. And the other thing is that the fellow member of the UT system, the president here of UTSA, mentioned to us that he's starting a new college here, cybersecurity, AI college here. He's trying to move that. So I think that's going to be an important also source of future trained workers that could come in and fill that void in cybersecurity.
Well, please help me thank our panel both for their insights and their service. Thank you. They'll stick around if you have questions for